Huge thank you to CIBC for making We Get It possible.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Young Adult Cancer Canada. This is episode 2, season 3 of We Get It with your host, Alex Mandarino. You are watching this on February 7th, so Monday, February 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully you're watching right away. If not, by all means, take the time to watch this when you have the ability to do so. But we're so glad that you joined us today. I have a very special guest today, someone that I've actually met before in person once, Alyssa, I think at the Local Life Toronto, where we did apple picking back in October, which was a lot of fun. And one thing I was really excited about is this new and improved sort of insight team that we're going to get into at Young Adult Cancer Canada, and a lot more, because obviously your story is an interesting one, and it would be as such if they kind of chose you for the insight team and you're chosen to kind of get a lot out there. So I'm really excited to kind of get into things, and I think a lot of people will resonate with this conversation. So Alyssa, I'm going to start. First of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. And the first question I will ask to you, just to kind of get things started, is what would you say are 3 words you'd use to describe yourself?
Well, hi, Alex. Thanks for the nice introduction. I just want to say, so my name, I pronounce it Alyssa, even though it's spelled, with the Y for anyone who's reading that. That's how I pronounce it. I know there's various ways of saying it. So I just want to put that out there, and thank you for having me here today to talk about, my role with Insight, as well as a bit about my cancer story. The 3 words I would describe myself, the first I'd say is compassionate. For me, volunteerism is something I've been involved with my whole life. I just find giving back to my community and either a grassroots organization or a large, national group like YACC, that's just part of my makeup. So when I see that there's a need, I'm just there to get involved. The other word I picked is dedicated. This is both in my personal life as well as in my professional life. I always want to get that task finished or get that project done, or, once you start something, you see it through to the end. And that's probably values of how I grew up. In a working family. And then the third word I picked is kind, and this also goes back to sort of my upbringing. My mom always instilled in us, always treat people how you want to be treated, and to this day that's just something that's important to me in my life.
Amazing. Those are all great words, and I think it really outlines obviously probably the upbringing that you've had a chance to experience that have led you to kind of where we're at today. So thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. And I guess for those of you who don't know, Alyssa, like much about you per se, I always like to kind of get this off everyone's chest early. Do you mind diving a little bit into your cancer experience and your current life, maybe living with relapsed multiple myeloma?
So my story, it's kind of a long one. So I sort of think about it in different steps.
Okay.
And stuff that was really, hard at the beginning. Now that I'm 12 years in, it's not such a big driver in my story now, but it's important to note it. And so one of the biggest things that I experienced was the difficulty of actually getting diagnosed with multiple myeloma. This is something that many young adults deal with, is that delayed diagnosis, but it was especially significant with my diagnosis in that myeloma is considered a disease of the elderly. So to take you back, it was 2010 when I was diagnosed. I was just turned 32. I had just graduated from university. I was single, but in a new relationship. So I was very excited about, my 30s and what was going to happen in life and, just adulting basically, right? And then I had all these symptoms and issues. And for several years, I went one doctor to the next, trying to look for an answer. And I just was either brushed off or told there was nothing wrong with me. Very, time and time again. And I'd go back to my family doctor and say, like, send me to someone else or something, right? Eventually, I was diagnosed when I started attending the ER, when I just couldn't live with the symptoms anymore. And I was referred from the ER to sort of an internal medicine team for hard to diagnose people. But when I walked in the room for that appointment, they basically told me we think you have multiple myeloma, and I had never heard of it. So it was just a total shock to go from all these appointments of, oh, you're fine. The worst one, I think, was when a doctor told me I was another stressed out young woman looking for an excuse.
Oh, wow.
Those are his exact words. I will never forget it, because I did try to file a complaint through patient affairs, but it just didn't really go anywhere. So that was just to get the diagnosis. So hearing, you have cancer, at first they didn't use the word cancer. They said multiple myeloma, bone marrow, blood. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a cancer of the bone marrow. So it took a while to figure out that I actually had cancer, because no one said you have cancer, right? And after I did hear those words, my treatment by all my team, my medical team, has been nothing but, fantastic. I'm very blessed to have such a great team of doctors who I see. So I'm at Princess Margaret Hospital, for anyone who is who's curious about that. From there, I did 6 months of chemo, followed by a stem cell transplant. And in 2010, that was after your transplant, they just, you hope for the best and you're on your way, and that was it. So later when I did relapse, so with myeloma, they prepare you that it does relapse. It's a relapsing cancer. So you hope for the best, you hope for many years of, of remission. So when I did relapse, it wasn't that initial shock, but it was, here we go again. And I did 6 more months of chemo, which for myeloma, it's 2 times a week IV for 3 weeks on, 1 week off. And then I had a stem cell transplant, which is an autologous transplant using my own stem cells. And from there, I did 4 more months of consolidation chemo. And then I switched to a maintenance regime, which was an oral pill for 3 years. And I've recently come off of that. It was my decision. I had said, quality of life is as important as quantity, right? So when you're dealing with side effects every day and you're on this never-ending treatment cycle, there comes a point where you have to think, what's important to you. And for me, just making the most of the time I do have, and enjoying my family and being able to get out and do things. So I chose to come off maintenance. I could have initially stayed on until relapse and then switched to another line of treatment, but instead I've come off, and I'm in my fellow blood cancer patients would understand what they call watch and wait, where you have cancer, but it's too low to measure. They have all these terms they use, and you go every 2 months or every 3 months, you do blood work, you see the doctor, and okay, no, not yet, you're still okay. So that's where I'm at. I live my life, 2 to 3 months at a time between those appointments. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing all of that with us. It sounds like even just leading up to the diagnosis, that there was a lot involved within the healthcare community, that you kind of had to advocate for yourself. And that's hard early on. And reading a little bit up on you prior to having this conversation, I noticed that similar to me and similar to a lot of folks who are diagnosed as a young adult, you're someone who connected with YACC, Young Adult Cancer Canada, I wouldn't say almost immediately, but very soon, maybe a year or so, I think, after diagnosis. So did you find that early on when you were first diagnosed or dealing with your experience that you were seeking support? Was that something that you wanted early on, or were you kind of taking it on your own?
I sort of had a moment where, initially I didn't want, and then all of a sudden something just happened that made me switch or seek that out. So I like to describe it, I had my initial treatment, that there was that shock, like, oh my God, I have cancer. Obviously, no one in my group had cancer, friends, family. We're just the stage of life we're at. We're not in that kind of chronic illness stage, right? So we got through the physical parts, and I had managed to go back to work. It was about a year after my first transplant, back to work, living life, and things are good. But there was, those thoughts keeping me awake at night, like, oh my God, like I have cancer, like no one gets it. So I like to joke, it was like a late night Google search in the middle of the night, like young adults in Canada with cancer.
Oh, perfect.
and then YACC comes up. So I found YACC not knowing what I was finding. No one had mentioned anything. Like, I had never seen social work. Like, there was just holes in my care of that kind of psychosocial part. I was missing that. It was so much like, let's get you to transplant and let's get you there, but that was missing. So I found that late night Google search, and I read every story on the site. And I thought, there's other people going through what I'm going through. And then I saw something, they had photos from one of the early retreats. And I thought, those young adults, good for them, but I will never do that. That's not for me. But eventually, it was only a few months later when I decided to sign up to take that risk and go to my first retreat, which was in spring 2012.
Right.
So just 2 years after my initial diagnosis, about 1 year. Yeah. So I think I had seen YACC in the winter, and then I went in the spring. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of experiences, is you kind of would maybe come across it. And it's funny because, you search it up and you almost search the exact term, that's the name of the organization, which is kind of great.
Yeah.
So worked out in your favor. And it's funny, the thing you brought up was all the stories on the website, which I think is so powerful. And to know that there's people of a similar demographic that are going through what you're going through, even though it might be their own story, it's comforting to know that there's something out there that's similar. So, or someone out there that might be dealing with something similar. So I know I can resonate that with a lot as well. And that's why, like, stories is a great segue into this idea of the Insight team, because it's such a diverse group of individuals. And to my knowledge, the Insight team met for its inaugural meeting on January 19th this year. And it's funny because when you and I were kind of planning the interview, I had just come upon the post on the YACC Instagram page, and I didn't even realize you put a little blurb together on the meeting, just kind of touching on
just
it.
A little reflection on the meeting, a little summary of what we did. So
and I mean, how was that conversation? I mean, especially like more so the fact that there was such a diverse group of individuals. How was it being in such a diverse group in the community for individuals going through cancer?
I think, it was especially more impactful if we think about what's been going on with COVID and the sense of this isolation. So for me, like finding YACC initially, there was that isolation and just coming out of that fog and joining something bigger, and having a chance to share your story and talk. So for me, the first meeting for Insight, there was a bit of that feeling of like, I've just been stuck in my, my own four walls by myself. And all of a sudden I'm joining something bigger, and, like that feeling maybe coming home, to be among people who kind of get what you're going through, right?
Totally.
That's a very powerful experience, that I don't take lightly, because I've been able to experience a few times with YACC, but I just have a few notes here.
Yeah, go for it.
So just the sense when we first met. So anyone who's been to a retreat with YACC, on the first night, you have an opportunity to hear everybody's story in a very non-judgmental, and just have so many people listening to you. That feeling is just something I don't think you could ever replicate outside of the YACC community. And in terms of Insight, just hearing from people with a different lived experience and a different cultural upbringing, and how they were impacted by cancer and how it's significant in their life. There was a new level that I have not been able to experience before. So it did already after the first meeting, just in the first conversations, which we'll talk next, I think, when we talk more about family, just hearing different experiences, and it makes you think. And I just feel like, that being part of something bigger is going to be a very special experience for me. So I'm here like to learn as well as to give, right? So
totally. That's a very great point, actually. I think it's, it's when you live your experience with cancer and then you meet others who go through it, everyone has their own experience, but you learn so much about like what goes on outside of maybe your own personal cancer journey that makes you think, and maybe you take positives and negatives from it, but it is really a learning experience as much as it is giving. That's such a good point.
For me, like where I live in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada's biggest city, and I'm a patient at Princess Margaret Cancer Center, one of the top 5 research. So what I have access to, it's not that I take it for granted, but hearing someone else speak who lives in a different region of Canada, and they're not able, it's, much more difficult to access something like that. Totally. So that's just one thing that I would normally, it would be in the back of my mind, but it wouldn't be something that I really have firsthand knowledge about. But hearing someone else speak of that really opens my eyes, Yeah,
100%. And I have a very similar experience, Princess Margaret Cancer Center, and it was amazing. Amazing is relative because you don't want to be there, but if you have to go somewhere, it's a nice facility. So to hear other perspectives is probably a lot of, it gives you a different way of seeing things. And you don't have to physically show me, but I'm just kind of curious because one thing you touched on in that blurb about the first Insight meeting was that you had all shared a picture that showcased something meaningful to each one of you individually. So do you mind me asking, like, what was kind of the picture that you shared? Was it like an individual picture? Was it a group picture?
So the picture I shared was a picture of me at my first retreat, which was called Retreat Yourself West. It was in Canmore, Alberta. So it's a picture of me. The center was on this like small kind of private pond or lake. It was, right in front of the mountains. So the picture is me standing in front of the mountains at the retreat. And it's just, I was just in awe, a lot of the weekend, either by the view everywhere, just seeing the mountains when you're from like flat Ontario, right? It's special, but also in awe of just how open people were and how willing to share and to become part of this group, looking for just, looking for that connection, and how people were just so willing to give that, right? And that was how I joined YACC. So, and then YACC has been such a big part of my life, the rest of my journey with cancer. So I thought that was a nice picture to share with the group. So
I completely agree, and I'm looking at it as we speak now too, and it is gorgeous. First of all, the background, which adds to the whole aesthetic of the picture, but it is probably more powerful in that is kind of your introduction to YACC. And I've been to a retreat yourself. Incredible experience to have such a smaller group and connect so early on when you meet somebody. I don't think that experience happens much outside of like a retreat like that. So I know exactly what you're talking about. That's amazing. Now, going back to that first meeting, one thing you touched on is the big theme. One of the bigger themes that got brought up in the Insight team's first meeting was family. And a lot of the idea really of like cost of pursuing beginning a family, starting a family maybe after cancer, things like fertility, which I know I've had a bit of experience with. Just in a general sense, when it comes to things like family, what was that conversation like as a group?
I would say the conversation, it sort of naturally flowed right from the beginning. It just sort of, that theme was there. As we showed pictures that were important to us, many members showed just different pictures of their family, like either their kids or spouse or partner or another family member who was impactful in their journey. And, the conversation was sort of, well, this is my family or my kids. And from there, you talk about the difficulty it was to pursue a family after cancer, or how a miracle happened that you did get a family, that things worked, just with cancer, everything sort of becomes that much more difficult. It happens. So when you're a young adult, so I mentioned in my diet, when it happens to you, you're not really thinking about family. Maybe you're not at that stage yet, right? So you're either trying to finish school or build a career. So family is sort of that next piece of the puzzle that usually happens a bit later. And all of a sudden, when your fertility is in question, like, okay, the fertility preservation, but not everyone has access to that. And then the costs are probably a number one prohibitive factor, because some provinces now may cover one cycle of sperm banking or one cycle of IVF. But what if that doesn't work? And what if you don't live in a major urban center where you have access to that? So for me, I was referred to the fertility clinic by my oncologist, who happened to be probably in her mid to late 40s as a woman. And she said, you should go see this doctor. And I wasn't even thinking like, oh, I'll have kids, right? Like I was not there. We went to the consultation and he said, yes, your bone marrow transplant, you will not be able to have kids after, you should do this.
Wow.
And at the clinic I went to, Ontario did not fund it at the time. They offered a sort of a cost reduction for the procedures, but there's still the cost of the medications, which I had already had a career type job with benefits. So I was able to charge, I think 50% through my benefits. Nice. So in my own case, we were able to find the money and to make it happen, but not everyone has those resources.
No.
So, and this is something that early on, these decisions, and that happens, you know, it's going to have such a big impact on your life later on.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if having kids, like you wouldn't think about it until later. So this is an issue, I think, that we've discussed at other YACC groups, and I'm very mindful that, yes, I do have my son. So just to complete the loop, we did my fertility preservation. The man I was seeing at the time, he offered to come with me, and I said, you don't have to, like, I'm okay to use a donor.
Right.
My family jokes, they knew he was a keeper when, right? So together we froze embryos because the technology they told us for freezing eggs was not there yet. And the doctor didn't feel strongly that it was a viable option. So that's why we froze embryos. I know that things have changed in the last decade. So when we were sort of ready, I wasn't even ready to start a family, but my doctors, when I was in remission, were saying, my one doctor said, if you want to do it, now's the time, right? Knowing that my myeloma would come back. So we thought it would just, you know, it would just happen the first try. Oh, well, we'll just go back to the clinic and we'll do the cycle and we'll do the transfer and it's going to work. So we were not prepared at all for when it didn't work. And when it didn't work a second time and it didn't work a third time. We got to our last time, our last 2 embryos, and they were recommending surrogacy, which again is not in reach for most people. And we knew that that was not an option for us. So we said, we'll just try it and get it over with, right? And that's the time that worked. So that's sort of my own journey with the fertility experience. And I know it's not everybody's, so.
No, but I think it's the point that I kind of take away from that, and thank you for sharing a lot of that and being open about it, is maybe fertility as an example, because I had a similar experience where it's probably the last thing on your mind when you get diagnosed is that in the future. But the fact that there is resources, and I think the 2 of us have been maybe lucky to be recommended by or sort of pointed by an oncologist towards one of the fertility clinics, but it's not something that's on your mind right away. And it's something that we need to advocate for and be more aware. But it's not like that first thought on your mind when you're diagnosed, and to realize like the cost of it sometimes can be very difficult when you're put in kind of that place where you have to make a split second decision. I'm glad that you had that conversation. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just want to add one thing too.
Of course.
I think many people have heard this. Well, you can always adopt, right? People tell you that, and really adoption in Canada is not like black and white and simple like that. Adoption itself is very expensive. It's very difficult. It's a long process to even, you know, be matched or anything. Yeah. So I just feel like that's something people will often say, well, you can always adopt. And that's not a simple process itself. So that has its own barriers, as well as cost and regional and a lot of similar issues, I think. So.
No, of course. Yeah, no, it's definitely something I can understand why it was a big topic that got brought up early on in the Insight team. There's a lot of kind of avenues to discuss. And I mean, speaking of family, I know we briefly spoke before this interview, just kind of around the topic and everything. It seems from what I can see that you have a great like kind of dynamic in terms of family. I know we're scheduling the call today on a Saturday just because Sundays you do family skiing with your family. So that's amazing. That's such a cool like ability to do that is awesome. How important is / was your family throughout your cancer experience?
I think for me, like it's changed over time as I've gone through this experience. Initially, when I was diagnosed, I mentioned I was single, recent graduate, like I was in a career sort of stage.
Yeah.
My family, we've been close, but we were all doing our own thing, right? My parents were snowbirds, so they're not even in the country. My sister was ready to have her first baby any day. And then my spouse and I, we were just recently dating, like a few months kind of thing.
Yeah.
So when the doctor said, oh, we think you have multiple myeloma, we're admitting you, you need an urgent bone marrow biopsy, we need to start you on treatment today kind of thing. And they said, I was alone by myself. They said, you need to call someone, right? And I didn't even know, I couldn't think of who to call. Like, who do I call? I don't have really that main person to call. Like, I couldn't think what I should do. So finally he just said, just call, like, you know, do you have a sibling? Yeah, I'll call my sister. So part of it, I might have been in shock. So we rallied together, you know, family, and my husband, he sort of stepped up, you know,
big time
into this. I don't like to use the word caregiver because we've never really identified it. I guess supporter is a better word. I like how YACC uses that, supporter. So that was the initial diagnosis. We ended up moving in together, and he used to drive me to my appointments and that kind of thing. We got married about a year after, like in 2011. So since then, family's been, I think, a bigger part. Like I've been not alone. Like initially I felt alone. Yeah. So now my family's there. And I just want to, with my son, a part of what I do is I just want to have a lot of experiences and create that legacy that he remembers me, that we did all these things. We took the pictures, you know, and while I'm in remission, while I'm feeling good, we get out and we do a lot of stuff, you know, apple picking, like we went, I brought him, for those who don't know, I brought my son to the local life apple picking event, and it, you know, it was some challenging, he had to pull him up the trees and stuff, but it was fun, right? So just to take him out. And so for the skiing, I'm not a great skier, I should add. I used to ski in high school, and then I was a snowboarder for a very long time. And now, due to some limitations in my hips from my treatment, I find the snowboarding is difficult, like to sit down and put the board on and then stand up again, for anyone who's a boarder knows that. So I've switched back to skiing, and I've got him skiing. He's almost a better skier than me after 3 years. So just, you know, it's just something to do as a family that we could get out and have this shared experience. And
totally. No, that's amazing. No, the apple picking was amazing. It was the first time that Kayla and myself as local life leaders thought, let's open it up to more of a family dynamic. And sorry, your son is Elliot, is his name?
Elliot, yeah.
Elliot, yeah. And he was like a firecracker. He had so much energy, and he brought a great like level of enthusiasm to the group. And I'm not just saying that. That was awesome to have him around. I had a question planned more so for how you kind of shared or broke the news to your cancer experience. But if you don't mind, Alyssa, I'm just going to switch it up, because I just, something that I thought of is obviously, Elliot, I must not have been around when you were first diagnosed, but I guess now, and you've probably found a good balance, but does he kind of understand the cancer journey at all? Or do you kind of, how do you work that in with conversations with how you have your family dynamic with your son, if that kind of makes sense? Yeah,
so anyone with kids, you know, they don't come with an instruction manual. So a lot of it, you're just trial and error, like you just try something. And then with kids, you learn it takes a while to learn that stuff that you remember and you remember doing with them, they're growing and they're changing so fast and they don't remember. And when they're so young, he doesn't remember stuff that happened. Like he's 6.5 for anyone who's listening who doesn't know. He's 6.5. So you think, oh, that was just 2 years ago, but he doesn't remember.
Yeah.
So I've always had cancer that he's known me, but he might not realize that, right? He knows a bit about why he's an only child, for example. We've had some conversations.
Okay.
But when I relapsed, he was 2.5. So when I had my second stem cell transplant, he was almost 3, 2.5. And it was just a big shock to our family. We asked, do you remember when mommy was bald? He says, no, I don't remember. And we'll show him a picture maybe, right? So
yeah,
they don't remember. And then last year, or 2 years ago, maybe, we felt like they start doing stuff in school. They talk about cancer. Terry Fox Run is a very big event in schools. So we thought we should maybe get some learning around that. So he did a support group at Gilda's Club for school-age kids.
Yeah.
And it's a play-based group where they talk about some important issues for cancer. They talk about what cancer is, for example, and just other, people who care about you. And it's at their level. So that was only 2 years ago. And we asked him, I don't really remember. So we've learned that this isn't a conversation you can have once and that's it. No. This is like an ongoing at their level, coming back to it. And it's much more than I sort of expected when I had kids, that we'd have to kind of keep bringing it up all the time and keeping a space for conversation and stuff. And having kids with cancer is probably, it's next level, I'll be honest with you. Juggling chemo rides was difficult the first time because our chemo is like twice a week. When you have a 3-year-old, you got to pick up at daycare and then you got to take care of, and you have chemo, and that was just, I wasn't prepared for how difficult that would be. So
yeah, I know. I commend you fully. Like because I don't have kids myself, and I am always really fascinated just with, because I've spoken to a lot of YACC members and alumni who have kids at different ages when they're diagnosed, and obviously everyone's experience is different, but I just get really curious on how it all works and how you navigate through it. But I think the one point you made early was like, there's no recipe or, there's no one size fits all way of doing things. And it's great that you have him involved in the cancer experience. Gilda's Club's a wonderful organization. They have a lot of very interesting like workshops and things like that. But it's very cool that you have him invested in. Obviously it is something that you can't have just once. It's something that's a part of your life, and you kind of have to introduce it in different ways. So that's really cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's their normal, right? That's their normal. So they have to learn that's just how it is. And, so that's something we've had to sort of incorporate in our life. So.
Of course. No, absolutely. Just briefly switching topics. You mentioned to me early on when we were talking, before obviously today's conversation, that you consider yourself like a YACC graduate. So that's a very kind of specific role, but what kind of role do you think that plays really in the community of people who attend YACC events or within the YACC group?
So I came up with that term, a YACC graduate. So I used it for Insight. We did a video that we sent in, and we did some written, not assignment, but we did a written exercise or whatever. So I came up with a YACC graduate to sort of figure out where I am with YACC these days. So YACC, we're age, I would say now 18 or younger than 18 with a adolescent cancer experience. So under 39 is basically the age. So what happens when you turn 39 or you turn 40 with YACC?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, like I'm turning 40. I can't apply to YACC events. And when it's been such a big part of your life, all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, what happens now, right?
I know, I bet.
So YACC is very welcoming to people older than 39 at conference, right? We're welcome to attend and bring a supporter, but there's also that part of your life where maybe you can't relate to someone who's 18 anymore. Maybe you are at a different stage of life. And I do feel where I'm at now with my life is at a different point. So I came up with this YACC graduate as something like I've attended the retreat, the conference, chats, we used to do what was the big cancer hookup, local life. So I feel like I've taken part. The only thing I haven't had a chance to do was the adventure, which, unfortunately, I guess you lose some. But yeah. So this is sort of the term I came up with as a YACC graduate, thinking back on my experience with YACC, and I want to bring back some of the points that I feel really helped me on my journey, that are still helping me. Especially for me, was that ability to advocate for myself, to speak up and say, well, no, I don't agree with that, or no, please do another test or something, right? Because how my initial diagnosis came about, I feel I was like brushed off a lot, and I wish I had had that ability. Yeah. So for example, just bringing that back to Insight.
Yeah, of course.
So that's sort of where I came up with the YACC graduate term. As well as a YACC graduate, I want to remember all the people who I've met on my journey who are no longer with us. So I'm sort of bringing some of that back to some of their messages and their strengths and stuff they wanted to do with YACC. So yeah. But the big part I want to do is to create this space. So what happens when you are a YACC graduate? Where do you go, or what can you do? So this is a space I want to help create, I guess, through Insight.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, that kind of answers a bit of the question, but maybe that's one reason for this. But is there any other reasons, or really why did you apply for the Insight team in the first place?
I just felt, so it's that sense of, I don't need to learn as much from YACC anymore. I've benefited so much from the sessions we've had at conference, and I've been able to put those into practice in my life, or, some of the skills, things like we had a conversation about financial and estate planning, for example. Okay, well, I learned that at the session. We did our wills, we did our power of attorney. So some of that practical stuff, I feel I've learned at YACC, and I've put it into practice in my life. So maybe it isn't as relevant for me to attend the conference and to take up a spot that somebody who's either newly diagnosed or who needs to learn those things or needs to hear those messages. Right. Maybe that spot's for them. So for me, like, I was still wanting to be involved in YACC, but where's a good space for me? And the YACCtivists, they were doing YACCtivists, a new group of YACCtivists. And initially I had applied for that thinking, I'd be good at that. Like, I share my story quite regularly. I have my work with Myeloma Canada and my own blog that I do. But then I thought, I am a little old, right? I had to acknowledge I am a little old, and my experience, so it's relevant. It's not the experience of people 10 years younger than me. Right? So maybe their experience is more relevant to the community. So then I saw that the Insight program got that very exciting email about Insight, and I said, like, that's for me. Yeah. If that's where I can best use my knowledge and skills and experience to give back to the community that's helped me so much in my journey. So
yeah, they came at the right time, really, that gave you a chance to kind of give back. And I mean, you've touched on a lot of it already, but is there one part that, one aspect of this Insight team? I know there's a big, kind of push for advocacy and fundraising, and really similar to YACCtivists, sharing personal stories is going to be a big factor, which I think it seems like you have a really good grasp on. Is there one aspect or a specific aspect of the Insight team that you're most excited for?
I think, advocacy speaks to me because it's something I've been doing for a number of years outside of YACC, in the cancer community. I do work with Myeloma Canada, and it's advocacy, share my story, as well as it's sort of this combo of AYA cancer, and then this rare cancer that you get as a young person, which for all intents and purposes in the myeloma community, there's still a 20-year difference between myself and the average patient.
Okay.
Even though I've lived with myeloma for over 10 years now. So I think for me, the advocacy space, as well as sort of just coming up, with some new ideas of how we can grow YACC and how we can connect with more people outside of just a conference for 100 people. Like, how can we have programs, or what kind of things can we have available to our whole community, whether that be a YACC graduate or a newly diagnosed patient. So that sort of part I'm also really, I feel pulled by, is just the growth of the community. And part of that, the practicality is the fundraising. So, I want to do what I can to help increase some revenues and make sure YACC's able to connect with more people. So.
Good. And I think one question I had, but I think you answered a lot, was if you had any goals in mind for the team. And I think we kind of got into a lot of that already. I think one thing that I'm actually really curious about is, and I'm jumping ahead just to one of the later questions, is touching on the idea of the YACC graduates. And now that you are in a position to kind of make a lot of, take a lot of opportunities to advocate and push for the strategic initiatives of YACC, maybe what advice would you give to other YACC graduates who might be in a position now where they feel like they're out of the range of age range to be able to attend events, and might feel isolated? Do you have any advice or any knowledge to give to them?
I think that's a very important point, because that sort of draws into what I want to work on with Insight.
Yeah.
In my own experience, as I've sort of aged out or progressed through YACC's curriculum. At the same time, I've been connecting more with my own cancer community, with the myeloma community. I've done some work with Myeloma Canada, but as well, just connecting with patients. I attended one of their conferences a few years ago, and initially the same, like, oh, I wouldn't attend that when I was first diagnosed, but now I'm further in the spectrum. I did get quite a lot out of it, even though a lot of patients are older than me or their supporters are older than me, having a shared cancer diagnosis. And so I would say, don't be scared about that age difference. There will be an age difference as you sort of move through the YA away from that. You're still going to be younger, but don't be as put off by that. So give it a chance. Maybe some groups that through Gildas Club or Wellspring or some of the other organizations, they have a lot of stuff like art therapy or some of the exercise seminars. So maybe reach out to some of those and just try out something new like that, and maybe a new skill. Right now with COVID, things are mostly virtual, but there is quite a lot out there still. So I think it's, now that we know the importance of a community, is don't go back to sort of being isolated. Find some other 100%. Things that maybe help bring that connection.
Yeah.
So, and there is some stuff out there. Even maintaining friendships, like some of my YACC friends, we're not at an event, but we still chat online. We still chat. I've seen people in person. So make that effort, even though it might feel weird. Maybe say, can I get your email, or can I send you a messenger or something, right? So reaching out outside of the organization and maintaining that connection as well. So
yeah, that's the one thing you right at the end kind of touched on it too, is you've made all these friends. Like, there's no need to, it's very important, especially in these times, to try your best to not isolate yourself. Still, get in touch with the friends you've made. Just continue those relationships, whether it's virtual or in person. It doesn't mean you have to take a complete step away now that you're out of the age range. It just means that maybe there's some limitations, but you still have all those people that you've met. So utilize that to your benefit.
Like,
so
I still show up at Local Life, and I feel welcome, and we have a great time. So don't be like, oh my God, I'm 40 now, that's it, I can't go. You can go. It's, just find, don't be scared,
No.
And No one's judging, right? We don't
No,
judge.
no,
Yeah,
not at all.
Judgment-free zone, no.
It's way more fun. I found it's way more fun, these events, whether it's local life or retreat yourself or the conference, when there is like a different group of age and gender and like culture. Like it's way more fun when you have all these different groups get together, because you're learning and you're like, there's just a different dynamic. It's not as fun if you don't have different types of experiences and demographics. That's the way I see it. So you're 100% right on that. Yeah,
and it's helpful. It's helpful for other people who might be more newly diagnosed or more early in their journey to meet people who are further along or who've gone and can say, no, yes, you should apply for a retreat. Yes, it will change your life. Or do go to conference, and to hear that from other people other than just, those late night Google web searches. So
100% agreed.
Yeah.
So Lisa, just general question now, how are you doing currently? Like with everything going on, either in your cancer experience in life, work, family, hobbies, like how are you keeping? How's everything?
Like life is pretty good. It's not without its challenges, I'm sure.
Of course.
Like everybody, this pandemic has put a whole new level of just change and surviving, day to day. For me, I had relapsed in late 2017 as I started treatment, and I had my transplant in 2018 and then did, my follow-up treatments and stuff. So I was just preparing to go back to work, which was about 2 years in 2020, like winter 2020, say. I was putting stuff together. I had been on a leave of absence through disability through work. And unfortunately, I had contacted my boss and we had sort of put some plans in place, but then with the COVID and having my son, I had to sort of step back from that, going back to work to just be able to care for my son with the repeated school closures. So I sort of had to give up on that. So right now I'm just a stay-at-home mom. I'm not working outside of the home right now. I do hope to maybe go back to work. I still feel this pandemic is still, childcare is still not really available, and the whole thought of working from home in a full-time, I work in HR, in a full-time career job, as well as juggling the online school and all that stuff, I would not be able to handle that stress. So that's where I'm at sort of in career-wise. And yes, I did take a break from cancer, but it's not cancer that stopped me from joining back into the workforce. And in terms of my health, I did my consolidation, which for people who don't know, that's just a fancy term for meaning you do more chemo after your transplant to hopefully get any residual cells. So I did that. And then I think it was 2.5 years on an oral pill as a maintenance, take once a week kind of the thing. And that was last spring when I decided that I just couldn't live with the side effects anymore. Like it's all the typical fatigue, upset stomachs, all those similar things that everyone I'm sure is aware of. And I had done a bone marrow biopsy, which showed no detectable myeloma cells. So they were happy to let me try. And I've been able to maintain my remission off treatment. I go every 3 months for follow-ups, and so far things are good. I do know I will be on more treatment sometime in the future. Again, we're just hoping for a long remission, as good quality of life as possible for as long as possible, at which point I will be looking for more of novel therapies, either immune therapy or perhaps a CAR T cell transplant, if that's available, something like that. So so back in the watch and wait.
In that stage.
I feel it's one of the hardest parts about myeloma for me, though, is knowing that it's going to come back, but trying to be optimistic about the future, but always looking over your shoulder, right? Because it's going to come back. Whereas when you're in active treatment, you're doing everything you can to just keep that in the cage, right? So I know. That's what a lot of people bring up, is when you're in treatment, there's almost this comfort level of we're moving towards kind of like an end goal. Whereas when you're in that limbo stage, it's kind of hard to
it's hard mentally to kind of deal with all of that when realizing I don't really know how I feel about it all. I can understand that for sure.
And then with the virtual, so I had an in-person appointment in November, and just going, I hadn't had an in-person appointment in 2 years, right? I had been on virtual phone calls and you feel like, is something getting missed? Are they missing anything? You have a 5-minute phone call and like one blood test or whatever. I felt walking back into the clinic, hematology at Princess Margaret, and there's the nurses, the fellows, my doctor, the team. I felt like really good, like, oh my God, it feels so good to have face-to-face conversations and to go over my blood work and to do all these things. So now I'm back on this virtual follow-up care, which I know they're doing the best, and I know, but in the back of your mind, you're like, I hope nothing's getting missed, right?
Yeah, I get
it.
Yeah. And look, I mean, we're obviously going to be keeping in touch, and we're hoping to see you at more local life events with Elliot and your family if the opportunity arises. So we'll very much be keeping in touch with all of that, and I'd love to hear how things are going. I always love to end things off with a random question. I ask everybody this just to kind of end things off on a positive note. What are your top 3 favorite fruits?
I saw the question. To be honest, I'm not a huge fruit person.
Okay.
But I would say I like things. I like raspberries, strawberries. I'm gonna say raspberries, strawberries, and blueberries because I have like a berry smoothie.
Yeah.
Well, quite often. So
those are perfect. Those are perfect smoothie fruits to start or end your day. I completely agree with you there. Very good. I'll take it. Amazing.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Alyssa, then thank you for joining us today and giving us a great new perspective on the idea of the Insight team and all there is to offer, and being a YACC graduate and what that means, and really bringing forth like a new perspective on family and how you handle, your cancer experience with your family. So I'm very grateful for you to join us today. We'll have this episode out, and I hope everyone who's listened today got a chance to enjoy. Have a great evening, afternoon, or morning for whenever you're watching, and we'll see you later, everybody.
Okay, thanks, Alex. It was really great to come and chat with you today. And I think to be part of Insight, we're a brand new team and it's a brand new group, and very excited about what's going to come and what we're going to establish. So stay tuned.
I agree. Absolutely.